Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear participants. Welcome to this session of the Islamic Shariah of Jihad that we have been studying in the past few sessions. Today, hopefully, we'll be completing this chapter. So remember, this is a chapter that is part of Ustaz Javed or Ghamidi's Meezan, which is his understanding of the contents of Islam. And we have covered some chapters that relate to the social Sharia, his opinion Sharia, of course, Jihad Sharia is going on, and at the same time, other important areas of the Islamic Sharia. So, though they have not been discussed and taught in the same sequence as they are found in the book, but once the sequence is completed, all the chapters are covered, they shall be arranged in the same sequence. So, as far as the Islamic Sharia of Jihad is concerned, the most important thing that has to be kept in mind is that the jihad, the way we understand it as a military or a militant struggle in the form of qital, which means armed warfare. It cannot be conducted in any way by an individual or by an organization. It has to be something that must be ventured forth on the authority of the state. So it's only the rulers of the state who can declare jihad, and as a result, no other individual or organization has the prerogative to do so. And the second important thing that we have been discussing regarding this all-important doctrine is that there are two different forms of jihad or qital, and if they are not distinguished from one another, then we'll end up doing some things that are absolutely beyond our circle of authority, and we will be in fact trespassing into the domain of God. So the only form of jihad that can be conducted today, as has been discussed in our last session, is to curb oppression and injustice, and of course persecution is one form of that. Other than that, there is no other form of jihad that can be launched. The other type of jihad which actually existed in the times of Prophet Muhammad was one in which people who had intentionally denied the truth, they were given, Prophet and his companions were given this authority to punish them when they persist on their denial. Yes, most of them accepted faith, and only some of the prominent ones persisted in this denial, and they became active enemies. They were put to death. So, as far as the punishment of the Jews and Christians are concerned, of course, later on the Sahaba attacked the Roman and the Persian empires and some other countries. These are the areas, or these are the countries to which, of course, letters were sent, and the truth had been unveiled in the most complete form. And in spite of that, they had denied, and because of that denial, they had been punished, or they had to be punished. And so, therefore, these countries that are in the surrounding areas of Arabia, all of them, they relate in the prime form to the people of the book. And these people of the book, as you can clearly see, are ones who are not the ones that exist today in our world. So this distinction has to be made. So the two types of jihad that were conducted in the times of Prophet Muhammad, one of them was to punish people for denying the truth, and the other one was against persecution. So the jihad that was conducted to punish people is something that was specific to Prophet Muhammad and, of course, to previous messengers. But the only jihad that can now be launched and conducted is against persecution and injustice, and that too, if diplomatic ties fail and no other option left, and the actual person or country has the military ability to curb such an oppression. So, if you remember, we had discussed that as far as jihad is concerned, it actually consists of these 5 major topics under which we will be discussing it. So we have finished the first 2 topics, the major topic being the second one, which is the directive of jihad. So we have finished the nature of the obligation, the driving force, the ethical limits, and the ultimate goal. Prior to that, we had also discussed the permission for jihad. Today we'll be covering, hopefully, the remaining 3 topics, because these are shorter ones. And as far as the third one is concerned, we'll start off with that, which is divine help. So remember, the Almighty has promised a divine help whenever some endeavor is launched and conducted at His behest, at His orders. So it's not that He just leaves the believers to their own selves, but He has promised His special help, that if they fulfill their obligations and they launch an attack in accordance with the directives of God, then even if they are few in number, they will be specially helped by the Almighty. So the basic verse in this regard is now cited before you. This is verses. These are back two verses. One is verse 65 and the other is verse 66 of Surah Anfal. I'm just going to read the translation. It says, O Prophet, arouse the believers to war. If there are 20 amongst you, patient and persevering, they will subdue 200. If 100, they will subdue 1,000 of the believers. But these are a people without insight. So you can clearly see that initially it has been said that if the believers are outnumbered by 1:10, even then if they fight, then the remaining portion in which they are falling short will in fact be compensated by God's help. But then the very next verse says, at this time, however, God has lightened your burden because he knows that some weakness has come into you. So if there are 100 of you patient and persevering, they will subdue 200. And if 1,000, they will subdue 2,000 with the permission of God. And truly God is with those who patiently persevere in his cause. So you can see that later on it has been reduced by 1:2. So they actually highlight, these verses actually highlight the principle on which this divine help descends on believers in an armed struggle specifically. So they clearly state that this matter is governed by a specific law and is not subject to the whims and desires of people. The Almighty has fixed a principle according to which he helps people who set out for jihad, and he always abides by these principles. So if you look at these verses, you'll find that there are basically three important areas that can be pinpointed. So the first of them is that the basic thing that entitles people to divine help is perseverance and resolution. So you can see the words which are used by the Quran are yakum minkum ishruna sabirun. Sabirun means their perseverance, they persevere in the cause of God, they're steadfast, they're resolute. So no group of Muslims becomes entitled to this divine help unless this first quality exists in it, which means that they are ones who are resilient, they are ones who are resolute, they are ones who persevere, they are ones who fight, and they don't run away. So a battalion of Muslims devoid of this quality should not expect divine help when it faces the enemy. The words sabirun and sabira, the both have been used in these verses. They clearly, as I said, show this. And also the words wallahu ma'as sabirin. So this, right at the end, it says, God is with those who patiently persevere. So that also shows that perseverance is the most important thing. Because this is the first thing that has to be understood from this set of verses. Secondly, another important thing is that an army must be equipped with proper military strength if it is to wage war. So no doubt, whatever happens because of God's will, and one must fully repose one's trust in God. But we have to understand that the Almighty has created this world on the principle of testing them, and there are certain laws that are enforced in this world. The scheme behind these laws dictates that whatever measures are adopted for doing good and virtuous deeds, they must have the backing of necessary resources. They must not be done without any resources. So these verses actually tell us that what these resources are. So a ratio between Muslim and enemy forces has been put forth in these verses by the Almighty, and it says that initially this would be 1:10 if they wage war. By ignoring this ratio, by succumbing to emotions that themselves would be responsible. So this, in fact, is a very important reminder that it should not be a suicidal mission. It should not be something governed by impetuous rashness in which we just take a step without realizing that we are properly militarily equipped for this task or not. It has to be done in a specific way. And as I said, that the Quran says, it's very clear, it says that the force of faith that compensates for any lack of material force. So it is a force of faith, which means that if you have a stronger faith, as has been the case of the earliest Muslims, if they were outnumbered by 1:10, even then that outnumbering by such a large proportion was something that was compensated by faith. And you can see the words in the verse. It says, Alima So it says, وَإِن يَكُمْ مِنْكُمْ يَغْلِبُ مِئَةٌ يَغْلِبُ أَلْفًا مِنَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا بِأَنَّهُمْ قَوْمٌ لَا يَفْقَهُونَ. And it says, الآن خفف الله عنكم وعلم أن فيكم ضعفا, which means that that God has lightened your burden because He knows that some weakness has come into you. And then, as you can see, the previous part says, بِأَنَّهُمْ قَوْمٌ لَا يَفْقَهُونَ, that these are people who are without insight. So this shows that insight is essential. This shows that zorf or weakness, when it comes into a group of people, then of course that is not going to compensate for that outnumbered ratio. And the word zarf, as you can see, which is used in the Arabic language, is not just used for material and physical weakness. It is also used for weakness in belief and faith. So if they have become weak, it's not that they have become weak merely physically. In fact, here, what is being implied is that they have become weak in faith. And the meaning of the words la yafqahun, used in contrast to the strength of faith, imply a weakness in faith and belief. So it is said that they have this weakness in faith and belief. So the verse we can see clearly says that since the believers are devoid of true faith and belief, the disbelievers, not the believers, disbelievers are devoid of true faith and belief, while on the other hand, the believers possess them, the believers would be the victors even if they are outnumbered in this way. And as we can see that the context of the verse shows that it was evident from the context, the context of these verses, that this ratio is stated at the time of the Battle of Badr. Now, this was the time when the Muslims were at the strongest, they were at their peak in their faith. And after this battle, many people entered the folds of Islam, and people who were not as strong in faith and resolve as though had been the pioneers, the initial converts. So, though their number greatly increased because of these mass conversions of people who were converting to Islam, but the level and extent of faith decreased overall. And since the converts were nevertheless not as strong in their faith as the pioneers, which are called Sabiqun al-Awwalun by the Quran, so the Almighty has Himself informed the Muslims of now this ratio has decreased to 1:2. Also, dear viewers, it has to be understood that this ratio that has been stated, and initially it was 1:10, and secondarily, or in the next part, it was 1:2. Remember, these verses are talking about the companions of the Prophet. They were a group of noble souls who waged jihad alongside the Prophet, and as a result of a direct command of the Almighty. And then in later times, for example, in the times that we are in, or maybe a little before us, we can clearly estimate whether this ratio has increased or decreased, keeping in view the extent of faith Muslims have. So we have to understand that this 1:2 ratio was the minimum in the time of the Sahaba, the companions, who were a bunch of noble souls. Today, maybe we have to, of course, work on some ijtihad and come out with some other specific number, but it, of course, cannot be more than that. It has to be less because we cannot rival the Sahaba. What guidance it gives is that we must actually give a lot of focus and attention to our military might. It should not be a suicidal mission, because if that military might is not sufficient to compensate, then victory is not going to come. And if you have to earn God's help, then as the Quran says, then the believers who are fighting must be equipped with their strong faith in God, and their own belief has to be as strong, because that is what's going to compensate for them being outnumbered. So this brings us to an end to this third topic, which is divine help. Next, we will take up another very important topic, which is the captives of jihad, or the prisoners of jihad. Now, this is something that we will now study, and we'll start off by reading a translation of verse 4 of Surah Muhammad, which is the 47th Surah, because that is where this whole issue has been discussed. So when you come across those who disbelieve, heads are to be struck off until when you have really routed them, bind them as captives. When you have bound them, the favor is to be done, or ransom is to be taken. This policy should remain until war lays down its weapons. So it is evident from these words that until its revelation, no war had begun with the disbelievers. It seems that it was revealed at the time of Battle of Badr. And the words clearly show that فَإِذَا لَقِيتُمُ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا, when you meet these disbelievers in battle, this means that they had yet to meet in battle. So clearly circumstances had reached the extent that this military warfare could occur anytime. So on this occasion, Muslims are told that if they encounter the disbelievers who had rejected the truth in spite of being convinced about it, then the real requirement is to put them to death. So remember, the punishment of idolatry or polytheism is death. That is what they will be punished with in the hereafter. In this world also, they will be punished in this way. The only thing is that this is at the behest of the Almighty, and that they deserve no lenience after being so insisting on deliberately denying the truth, which is unveiled to them by no other than a person appointed by God as his envoy. So when they are encountered in the battle, as much of them should be slain as is possible, because the Quran says, "Hatta iza asqantumuhum." They have to be, totally routed. Only when they are routed should the rest be captured as captives. So they have to be first routed, and the rest have to be captured, and they can be made captives. And then the verse says that they must be either set free after accepting some ransom, or they must be set free as a favor. They should continue with this policy until these disbelievers give up fighting. And therefore, the verse which is after this begins with the verse Zalik, which of course means that this is what they should do. So that has to be understood, that either they must be set free with ransom, or they must be set free without ransom as a favor, which in other words means that they cannot be captured or made slaves. So the directive is stated in the surah with reference to the mushrikun of Arabia, yet it is entirely general in its circle of application. And you know what? The reason is that if setting free with ransom or without it are the only options once the rejectors of a messenger are made captives, then it is all the more reason that others too not be dealt with in some other way. So although this verse occurs specifically for the idolaters, for the mushrikun, but this is something that has to be generalized also, because these are the only two options. So if for them there are no two options, for whom death was compulsory, for people for whom death was not compulsory, the people of the book of course, then we cannot go beyond them. So it's this very directive which we can say has actually put an end to making prisoners of war into slaves. And in this way, the institution of slavery has been totally routed, or was supposed to be totally routed in the times of Prophet Muhammad. But as Ustaz Javed Ahmed says, that there are three types of prisoners who were an exception to this rule. There were three types. And I'm just going to read out from a part of his book, which will actually show us who are these three types, or which are these three types. So the first one is that brutal adversaries about whom the verdict abroad was that according to the dictates of the law of Itmam al-Hujjah, they were required to be slain wherever found. Examples of people who were killed as a result were Uqba ibn Abi Mu'ayt, Nadr ibn Haris, and Abu Azza, the captives of the battles of Badr and Uhud. So these are the three prominent captives of battle of Badr and Uhud. They were not given any concession, and they were put to death because they were brutal adversaries and they were guilty of crimes. Moreover, we also know that at the conquest of Mecca, certain others were also slain as an exception to the general amnesty granted because of their open enmity. So open adversaries, brutal adversaries are an exception to this rule because they were ones who were guilty of war crimes and other acts of brutality. The second exception is that the captives of the Banu Qurayza who met a fate decided by an arbitrator appointed by themselves. So their men were slain and other women and children were sold as slaves. So we have already discussed this in our previous session, that the Battle of Qurayza, for them, Sa'ad ibn Mu'az was appointed as an arbitrator, and he decided the matter according to the Torah, because until that time, no directive which dealt with such a situation had been revealed in the Quran. And Sa'ad ibn Mu'az, we've already discussed this, was actually appointed by them, the Banu Qurayza themselves, because we know that he was a leader of the Khazraj tribe, and the Khazraj had a relationship with the Banu Qurayza as an ally, and they thought that he would be mean to them, but he was not, and he implemented the punishment of the Torah on them. Third, captives who were slaves prior to their capture and in certain instances were distributed among people as slaves. So this is the third instance. I mean, this is the third exception, that people who were already slaves and were fighting from the warring army, if they were captured, then at times they were distributed. But no free person was to be made a slave. So yes, the exception is that brutal adversaries were put to death. The captives of Banu Qurayza were to be dealt in a different way because of the special circumstances. And thirdly, captives who were slaves prior to their capture, they were also dealt in this way. So as far as the captives of war are concerned, we have to understand that these three cases were exceptions, and the directive stated in the verse that we have just seen, it is, of course, something different. So if all the incidents of the Prophet's time regarding prisoners of war are studied, it can be safely concluded that barring these three exceptions, everything done was in conformity with the above quoted directive of Surah Muhammad. Everything. And now I will cite some of these things that have been enumerated by Ustad Javed Ghamidi in his book, so that the whole picture comes before us of how these prisoners were beautifully treated, nicely treated, and set free, either on the basis of ransom or without any ransom. So this is the first point, that as long as the prisoners remained in captivity of state authorities, they were treated in a befitting manner. It is known that the prisoners of Badr were distributed among the companions, and the Prophet himself directed the companions in the words, Istawsu bil usara khayra, which means treat these prisoners well. So one of the prisoners, Abu Aziz, says that he was kept in a house of the Ansar tribe. He goes on to say that his hosts fed him with chapati, while they themselves just ate dates. So it's like sacrificing their own selves for this. When Thumama ibn Uthal, the chief of Yamama, was taken into custody, he, at the behest of the Prophet, was fed with good food and milk as long as he remained in captivity. Most prisoners of the Battle of Badr were set free after accepting ransom from them. Those among them who could pay in cash were exacted a ransom that ranged from 1,000 to 4,000 dirhams per prisoner, while those among them who were not in a position to pay this amount were set free if they taught 10 children amongst the Ansar to read and write. So they were set free on the expense of reading and writing, if they could teach reading and writing to children of Ansar. Abu Sufyan's son, Amr, was set free in exchange for Sa'd ibn Nu'man, whom he had imprisoned. Among the captives of the Battle of Bani Mustalaq, Javeria was freed after her father, Haris ibn Abi Dharar, paid the ransom money. Once Abu Bakr was sent on a military campaign. Among the captives, there was a beautiful lady. The Prophet sent her to Mecca and was able to win the freedom of many prisoners in lieu of her. Similarly, a prisoner of the Banu Aqil was sent to Taif, and in lieu of him, 2 prisoners in the custody of the Banu Saqif were released. So you can also see that this exchange policy of prisoners was also working in those times. Third, some captives were set free without any ransom. Among the Battle of Badr, Abu al-As, Muttalib ibn Handab, Wahab ibn Umair ibn Wahab, and Abu Azza were set free like this. So no ransom was taken for them. At the time of the Truce of Hudaybiyah, about 80 people from Mecca suddenly attacked the Muslims at night from the direction of Tanin. All of them were caught, and the Prophet set them free without ransom money as well. Sumama ibn Uthal, referred to earlier, was also set free on similar grounds. So you can see that continuously what has been said in the previous discussed verse, that the prisoners shall be set free either with ransom or without ransom. So we can clearly see that this process was in vogue, and either they were exacted some in the ransom, which of course they could afford to pay, and in other instances they were set free without so. And also during the time that they were kept in captivity, they were treated very well, and you can just see that how he has said that chapati was consumed by the prisoner himself, and as far as the household people are concerned, they confined themselves to eating dates, and they served their prisoner with chapati. 4. On some occasions, the prisoners were distributed among people so that they could directly deal with them or their relatives on the principle of فَإِنَّ مَنًّا بَعْدُ إِنَّ فِدَا, which means thereafter set them free as a payable or free them with ransom. The prisoners of the battle against the Bani Mustalaf were distributed in this manner. However, once the Prophet married Javeria, after she had been set free, all the Muslims set free the prisoners in their custody without any ransom, saying that their prisoners, these prisoners had now become the relatives of the Prophet. Prisoners from about 100 families were released in this way. The prisoners of the military campaign against the Hawazin tribe were also set free by the Prophet without taking any ransom from the people. Similar was the case of the prisoners of the Hunain battle. When the tribe of Hawazin came to buy the freedom of their prisoners, it came to their knowledge that all their prisoners had been distributed. At their request, the Prophet gathered all Muslims among them, among whom these prisoners had been distributed. When all had assembled, the Prophet expressed his opinion that as these people who have come to fetch their prisoners had repented, everyone should release the prisoners they had in custody. He further said that whoever wanted to set them free without any ransom should do so, and others who wanted ransom should be granted ransom by the state treasury. Now, this is absolutely amazing that the Prophet actually brought the freedom of certain prisoners who were distributed among the army because they were already slaves. So this is how the Prophet did that. He said that, well, if you don't accept ransom, if you don't set them free without ransom, then the state will pay you for that, so that you can release the prisoners. So, as a result of this request, 6,000 prisoners were set free, and those among the Muslims who demanded ransom were paid by the state authority. 5. Widows and other helpless women amongst these prisoners who had been similarly distributed were generally set free by the respective owners and married to them on the basis of their free consent. On these very grounds, the Prophet also tied the marital knot with Safiya, which of course had happened. So you can see there how clearly this verse has governed the whole scenario in which prisoners were either set free or they were kept as captives, but they were not enslaved. And of course, they were never made slaves, because this is the verse which actually put a complete end to new slaves being made. So all the effort that was there, as we already discussed earlier on in some of the other topics, was to deal with the current lot of slaves. So as far as new slaves are concerned, they could never have been made, because the only source of new slaves were the wars. And about these wars, it was said that prisoners cannot be enslaved. They have to be set free with ransom, or they can be set free without ransom. Of course, prisoners who were guilty of war crimes, they were punished, and that is an absolutely different thing. Now we come to the last topic, viewers, of this very important overall topic of jihad, and this relates to spoils of war. So the spoils of war, as you can clearly see, this again is a very important topic, and the amount of loot and plunder at times, the way it has been described regarding Muslim warring armies, has been enormously exaggerated and also not clearly understood. So now let us take a look at what the Quran says about the spoils of war. I'm just going to read out the translation of the first verse of Surah Al-Anfal. It says, "They ask you about the spoils of war. Say, the spoils belong to Allah and the Prophet. Therefore, if you are true believers, fear Allah and reform your personal relationship and obey Allah and His Prophet." So, if you look at the context of this verse and at the issues discussed in the surah, quoted in Surah Anfal, and this is a very important surah. It occurs in the second chapter of the Quran. Its counterpart is Surah Tawbah. So, it is the part in which this, the first verse of Surah Anfal has been revealed, the way the surah is progressing. It shows that after the very first battle which the Muslims fought against the idolaters of Mecca, which is Badr, the issue of distribution of the spoils of war came to surface. How would these spoils be distributed? So, there existed a difference of opinion about it among the Muslims. The Quran actually admonished the Muslims of this attitude and gave its verdict in this matter. The Muslims were told that they had no name in the spoils war because of the peculiar nature of these wars. They were basically fought at the behest of the Almighty. It was the Almighty who was fighting them with His angels and through these instruments of justice which were first the Prophet and his companions. So basically, this war is conducted by God Himself. So they were informed that all these spoils belong to God and His Prophet. And as such, they had discretionary powers as far as their disbursement was concerned, and they were not required to distribute it amongst the army. So, as I just have said, that these wars were fought under a specific law of the Almighty, according to which God, through His messengers, punishes people who intentionally deny the truth. These messengers and their companions in this matter are no more than agents of the implementation of this divine scheme. So they are instruments of God's justice. So it is with the help of the Almighty, a special help of the Almighty, through His angels, that these battles were actually won. For this reason, Muslims did not have any share in the war booty. But in spite of this, they are told later in the surah that only 1/5 of it will be used by the Almighty and His Prophet for collective needs. So, although initially it was said that all the war booty belongs to God and His Prophet, of course referring to the state, but then later on it was said, okay, although all of it belongs to it, but only 1/5 of it will be consumed by the state authorities, and the rest of the 4/5 would be distributed among the soldiers. Yes, among the soldiers. And the Quranic words are later on that have been cited. This is verse 41 of the same surah, Surah Anfal. And you should know that 1/5 of the spoils you get, O Lord, are for Allah and the Prophet and His near relatives and the orphans and the needy and the wayfarer. So clearly you can see that as far as this spoils is concerned, this distribution is because the believers had also assisted in acquiring them by using their personal weapons, camels and horses, as well as food, camps and various other items needed during these wars. So it was essential to give them their due from these spoils. So because of the fact that it was not a commissioned army, it was not a standing army, people used their own resources. They used their own weapons. So although in such cases, initially, the state had all the prerogative to keep all the war booty to itself, because of course these wars were fought by the Almighty. But because of the fact that believers also used their own resources, their camels, their horses, etc., so it was essential that their due should also be given. So in military campaigns where the services of Muslim soldiers and combatants were not used, they were told that all booty obtained would be used for the collective purpose of the state and state and religion, and for the poor and needy, and none of them would be given to the soldiers. So we know the fare, or the wealth of fare, these are wars that are fought in which, of course, Muslim combatants were not used. And for example, the enemy surrendered in such cases. And so in that case, it was said that all the wealth would belong to the state authority, so that it could be used for the poor and needy and for the collective purpose of the state. So for this, the Quran has said, and whatever the Almighty has bestowed His Prophet from among the cities, it is reserved for Allah and His Prophet and the relatives of the Prophet and the orphans and the needy and the wayfarers. So this clearly shows that wars in which the believers were not, their assistance was not needed, so no share was given to them. And the verses of Anfal, which have been, we've just discussed them, important for us is also to take a look at some of the heads which this verse or the earlier verses describe regarding the spoils of war. We already discussed that verse of Surah Anfal. So it says that first and foremost, you can clearly see that the words that are being displayed, that فَأَنَّ لِلَّهِ خُمَسَهُ وَلِلرَّسُولِ, and then it says that the rest, which is the 4/5, may be distributed only in a certain way. So what are these shares that have to be, which are to be distributed under these collective needs? So you can see that first and foremost is the share of the Almighty. For God is this share. So God Almighty is above all these needs, of course, and does not need anything. His share is actually reserved for the requirements of His religion. So under this head, wealth will be expended on fulfilling such needs, such as helping the cause of Islam at the state level, which is an obligation. And this, of course, includes measures that protect and promote it. Now, the second thing which is stipulated here is that of the Prophet. So the 1/5 that has to be used, so for that 1/5, One head is God himself, and the second is the Prophet. Now, besides carrying out his duties as the messenger, he was also the head of the Islamic State. And as such, he spent every moment of his life in discharging his duties. Now, to earn a livelihood while discharging his duties was not possible for him. He could not have done this. So in these circumstances, it was essential that he be granted a share in the spoils of war. So in other words, it was like a state salary that was being given to him, in which he was given this share, and so that he could work through the business of the state, through the rules of the state, through various other important assignments without earning a livelihood. And that was like taking care of his livelihood through the spoils of war. So the nature of this share was such that it was not given to him in his personal capacity. So therefore, after him, this could not have been distributed among his heirs. So this is absolutely clear that after his death, his share was expended by the state on his behalf and his prophetic capacity to fulfill the collective needs of the Muslims. So we can see that it lapsed to the previous share, which is God's share. So in the times of the Prophet's own life, it was given to him as his livelihood, but once he passed away, it was reverted to the collective needs of the Muslims. Now, if you look at the third share, it says Zil Qurba. So the third share are the near relatives of the Prophet. Obviously, these are those relatives who were dependent on the Prophet. So remember, the Prophet was not just looking after his own self. He was also looking after many people who were dependent on him. So Zil Qurba was these people, and he was a father to all Muslims. So this responsibility too, in accordance with the dictates of the Sharia and convention, was transferred to the state once the Prophet and his king, they who were remained as recipients of this share, of course, they expired. So as long as the Prophet and his king were alive, or people who were dependent on the Prophet were alive, this share was given to them. But once the Prophet has passed away and his king has also passed away, so this again lapsed, which means that it again was used for the collective requirements of the state. Now, the fourth thing which is mentioned is Zil Qurba wal Yatama wal Masakin. So, of course, Zil Qurba and Yatama is referring to the thing that we just discussed. So, Masakin. So, this means that the fourth share is of the poor. And in fact, if we can extend it, say, wal Masakin wal Misabil, which means the poor, the orphans, and the travelers. And you can see that the shares which are repeated, which are stated here, they are used, or they are stated with the particle lam. And here this lam is not repeated. It is repeated in the case of Lindari, it is there in the case of Libasul, and in the case of Zil Qurba. But for the next three shares, this lam is not repeated. So, of course, this means that this particle is appended to all these three shares stated reported. So the fourth category of shares is actually mentioned under the third stated share of near relatives. The reason is to honor the recipients of this category as if they are also the near relatives of the Prophet. Now, of course, this had leads to explanation. The society which is not sensitive to the requirements of these sections of the society, they are the underprivileged. If a society is not sensitive to their misery and the problem that they are suffering, then, of course, what else can they sort of for such a like? And we also know that as far as the spoils of war are concerned, they were essentially reserved for the collective requirements of the Muslims. The combatants of the Muslim army have not been granted any fixed share in the spoils of war by the Almighty. In this regard, the state has discretionary powers which it can exercise in the view of circumstances. In other words, what we can say is that all this issue of spoils of war, the ratio it has been said initially, as I said, that 1/5 would be belonging to the state and 4/5 would be distributed among the warring army. This was specific to the battles that were fought in the times of God's messenger as a result of the special law of Al-Mawrid. Today, if a warring army, a Muslim warring army, fights against a non-Muslim warring army, again, the issue of the spoils of war now is at the discretion of the state. They can use that, the spoil for the collective needs, or they can distribute them in any proportion they deem appropriate amongst the Muslim part. But this particular portion that has been described here in the Quran, it refers specifically to the times of God's messenger. Today, this issue should not arise. The Muslim state can fix a share. Of course, all the armies today, they are commissioned armies, they are standing armies, they are already paid for their work. But of course, the state wants it can still supplement their salaries and livelihood through some of the spoils. And of course, at the same time, the percentage of this is their discretion. The percentage is described by the Quran is specific to the wall of God's messenger. So this brings us to an end to this whole topic, in fact. And of course, it has been a very, very fascinating journey, at least for me, to teach it to you, because once again, as I said, this is one of the most misunderstood doctrines of Islam. And because of not understanding them, we see militancy fall around the world today. It surfaces in various countries, and it is used, the Quran is used in favor of these militant activities without understanding that these militant activities is armed warfare at the front end. It's sanctioned by the Quran. It has a very, very specific, and there are very specific conditions. No single person, no organization can conduct it. It has to be by the state. If the state is not doing so, you cannot give this pretext. Because they are not doing so, so we are going to organize the jihad. That is something that is absolutely beyond the Sharia. And also, I can safely say that all the tips that we have today compiled in the form of the Hanbalites, the Shafi'ites, the Malikites, and the Hanafites, all of them, there is a consensus. There is not any one of them which does not believe that war can be conducted without a state. All of them have this understanding as well. So the second important thing is that the nature of this enterprise, of course, is different. We must not confuse the jihad of the Prophet that was done to punish people for denying the truth. Today, this cannot be conducted. It only legitimate excuse or pretext for jihad, and that too, if diplomatic ties fail, and that too, if you have the military might, that it should be against persecution or injustice. So, if you have any questions regarding what we have covered today, or in general regarding this topic, please raise.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Our first question of the day comes from Shabnam. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mariam. Assalamualaikum, sir. Sir, जब आप explain कर रहे थे तो थोड़ा सा I couldn't properly understand. आपने ग़ज़वा हुनैन का जिक्र किया, जिसमें captives of war जो बाद में free किए गए, तो sir मतलब वो तो distribute कर दिए गए थे, तो like they were like slaves ना, तभी तो उन्होंने लोगों के, तो sir वो थोड़ा सा explain कर दें कि वो
If you remember that we had already discussed this earlier on, that there were 3 exceptions to this rule for Imam Mannam Bardu and Mafida. So one of them was the Battle of Qurayza. Of course, the other one that was discussed was that people who were already slaves, in the warring army, they were not fighting as free individuals. They were slaves. So as slaves, they were distributed amongst people who were, already there. So remember, slavery was still going on, and stoning and gradually it will be put to an end. But this is a time, the Battle of Badr was an era in which slavery was still going on. So new slaves were stopped from being made, but slaves which were already slaves, for them, as I said, a gradual strategy was adopted, and for that, of course, we have discussed earlier on. So the ones who were distributed were not, they were not free individuals. They were slaves originally.
Right, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Currently, Abdurrahman, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. Sir, with regards to slavery, I'm always trying to wrap my head around on this topic. It's always mentioned that Islam always tried to free the slaves, and Islam wants to abolish slavery, right? But how did it continue up until last century? And suddenly after Second World War, everything changed within 100 years. How is this possible? If Islam was so strict with regards to slavery, how did it continue for such long? And suddenly when some other power came in and it abolished within 100 years?
Yeah. So I think
this thing is always confusing.
I'm trying to explain this issue in another of our sessions in which slavery was specifically discussed in this, because of the social Sharia, if I remember correctly. So as far as the institution of slavery is concerned, a huge amount of confusion prevailed about it because of perhaps not understanding the 2 verses of the Quran One is in Surah Mu'minun and the other is in Surah Al-Mawrid, which says that sexual relations cannot be established with anyone except your wife and your slave girls. Now, this is something that perhaps was the cause of slavery not being understood as a temporary measure of which this verse was about. So remember, there was a time in which slavery was being gradually eliminated. So these two surahs, Surah Ma'arij and Surah Mu'minun, so both of them are Meccan surahs, and both of them, if they say that a sexual relation with the wife and your slave woman can be established, remember it was in that interim period. It was in that interim period in which the slavery was allowed, but gradually the Muslims were groomed that they must set free all the slaves. And right near the end of the Prophet's life, we know that this verse in Surah Nur was revealed, which says that you must set free all existing slaves, come what may, if they do muqatabat, which means that if they can guarantee that they will not become an economic burden, then you have to set them free for impact. So that's qatibulhum, that are the words in Surah Nur. But somehow this part of the Quran, it seems, eclipsed people's mind. And the two verses of Surah Nur and Surah Ma'arij, which were made for that interim period, their understanding somehow prevailed, as if they are saying that for all times to come, you can establish sexual relations or intimacy with not only your wife, but also with your slave women. Whereas, as I said, that these two verses would belong to that temporary period in which slavery was gradually being eliminated and people were being encouraged to set them free. And unfortunately, this is how still today also, I have discussed this earlier, that even today our Muslim scholars, a very vast majority, still believe that today if there is a war and you capture prisoners of war, you can still enslave. So although slavery has finished internationally because of certain other conventions, but remember, in the Muslim mindset, it still prevails, at least theoretically, which means that theoretically today, they believe that if ever there is a war between a Muslim country and a non-Muslim country and you capture slave women, you can make them slaves and have intimacy. So I cannot comment on this understanding because, of course, I think that it is absolutely false and wrongly perceived. And I think that this is the reason, perhaps, by not understanding and equating the whole scenario with the fact that there was a temporary campaign going on in which slavery was being gradually abolished. I have discussed various measures. So, first of all, their standard of living was raised. Muslims were told that they must, at all times, feed their slaves with the same food that they are eating and clothe them with the same clothes. In other words, the standard of living that they are maintaining, they should have the same standard of living for the slaves. And the purpose was that it would become so difficult for them that they would set them free, because how could you have the same standard of living for yourself and your slaves when there are scores of them? Similarly, we see that they were married off with one another. Even it was said that if you don't find good matches for your own self, then slave women who have been kept chaste, they can be married as well. So a whole bunch of directives were given. Then very important people said that they could not call them by this name. So Amd and Amma are the words that were used for slaves, man and slave woman. They were abolished. And in place, the Quran said you must use the word fata and fatat, which means a man or a woman, or a boy or a girl, so that the stigma of the word itself should not remain. And then on top of that, the Prophet had his cousin, Zainab bint Jahash, married to his free slave, Zayd ibn Harisa. Although the marriage would not go along when they were problems, but this is what he had in mind, that slavery should be elevated. And he kept a slave for himself as well, because it was gifted to him by Makaukas, the king of Egypt, Maria the top. And the reason that she was not free, we seems that the very, very probable that the Prophet was demonstrating that as long as you keep a slave until the time of Muqatabat, but that time it yet to come, how effectively and how efficiently and how beautifully you have to treat your slave girl as if she's your wife. So we know from history as well that Maria, the way she lived, and you know that she also gave birth to the Prophet's child, Ibrahim. So the way she lived, as long as she lived, was literally no different than the rights that other wives enjoy. She looked like a wife, although of course she never married. Okay, and he not that. He heard about the Quran had stopped him from marrying women. And indeed, the reason, of course, is that, as I said, was that as long as they are kept with him, or as long as she was with him, he created the example for the rest of the Muslims that till the time slavery is put an end to. During that period, if someone has to be with you, then this is how you should treat him.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem.